And I guess the idea is to go through with Danny a little bit about the film beforehand, and then throw it out to some questions from you guys sometime in the future. So, Danny Cohen, should we start with some boring stuff? Like, I'm assuming you had a camera and some lenses,
Yep.
and that kind of thing.
Yep. So it was shot on the Red Dragon, and we shot it mainly at 6K, and sometimes dropped down to 5.5 on some of the wider lenses just for coverage, and then we used master primes.
Very good. Did you shoot lens tests and stuff beforehand? Was the master prime something you'd done before, or something you?
Yeah, I hadn't used master primes on reds before, and purely because I always thought they're super sharp. But I think when you end up shooting, so we shot quite a lot of the film wide open, and I think they behave quite badly when they're wide open, so it takes the edge off them. So one of the main things was we didn't want to use any diffusion on the lenses. So we did test a lot of varieties of lenses. We shot Primos and Cooks and all sorts. But I think one of the things Tom was after was to play around with the depth of field and really having a single point of focus, and then letting the background fall away quite a lot. But key to him also was to not use diffusion on the camera. So he really wanted to get sort of pin sharp eyes, and then let things fall off. And if you do put diffusion, that takes the edge off how sharp the eyes can appear. So I mean, we looked at Primos and Cooks, and the thing about master primes is because they're 1:3, it's just that little bit extra that I think helps the lens or the image fall apart in a different way than if you were shooting at 2.
Yeah, and I guess there's a lot of wide-angle lenses in yours and Tom's sort of back catalogue and repertoire. So that 1:3 helps the depth of field when you're that close and that wide.
Yeah, I think it's always inevitably a combination of the stop, the level of light, and which lens you're actually on at the time. But it's always kind of working out that combination. And we had I think the sum total of 1 day to test lenses. So it's you have to be quite efficient and do it quickly.
Extensive.
Yeah.
3 hours.
Exactly.
And so this marks your 3rd feature film collaboration with Tom Hooper, but you guys go back further than that into Longford and the TV world. How do you guys approach the next project? Are you speaking about things a long way ahead of time, and how do you approach the prep process?
I think it's different for each film. I think something like Les Mis, we did have a lot of prep time, so we had about 4 months prep on that, but it was a different scale of film. And on the Danish Girl, we had, I think it was about 3 weeks. So you have very quick conversations, because it's just not enough time to address all the kind of areas that you want to talk through. So it's kind of just sort of grabbed conversations on trains usually. Yeah.
So from my knowledge, you just finished Room, came back from Canada, and then were you immediately into prep, or did you have any sort of decompression time?
No, I think we started. So Room finished at the end of 2014, and this started beginning of January 2015, and I think we started shooting beginning of Feb. So it was quite tight.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of highlights, a lot of big soft lighting sources, a lot of I'm guessing most of the interiors are set builds or occasional locations.
So yeah, exactly. So it's I mean, I think one of the things Tom, he was really keen was on this one very much to always sort of light Alicia and Eddie in a very kind of, it was trying to achieve a really soft light, but then didn't need the diffusion on the camera. So it was always kind of very big soft light, trying to create a bit of contrast. So it's inevitably where you put the soft light. And then the other kind of big deal for him was to try and put an eye light, always have something to reflect a ping, to give a ping. Because if you're going to shoot wide open and have a single point of focus, what makes the lens bite is to have something sharp to kind of to really kind of exaggerate where the focus is.
Yeah, a little zing in the eye.
A zing. Yeah.
And in terms of your approach to sort of lighting the performance, how did you sort of preconceive the idea of the transformation into Lily over the course of the movie? Were there things that you actively worked towards in terms of the lighting and the operating?
Yeah, I think mainly it was the lighting. So when Eddie has sort of fully transformed, and I think one of his big reveal moments is in the flat in Paris when Hans, the art dealer, comes round to meet Eddie as a man, but then meets Eddie as a woman. So that was kind of the point where we really wanted to sort of make Lily feel 100% Lily, and had thrown away Einar completely. So it was just really trying to work the big light, big soft sources, and kind of essentially to make it as soft and as beautiful as possible.
Okay, and obviously from a non-Danish Girl perspective, obviously both Room and Danish Girl were quite successful for their female cast members this year. What do you feel is your role as a camera operator and a cinematographer in the room with the cast? How do you blend yourself with what they're doing? Obviously, they're laying themselves pretty bare, in the film, in both the films. How do you fit into the mix?
Yeah, no, I think I think the way I try and do it is to create a light, or to light the set, and as much as possible make it specific to work for the scene that we're doing. But it's also to not massively clutter up the set with a lot of flags and stands and lights on the floor. So it's trying to get rid of as much junk as possible, but still be able to control the light and do something interesting with it. So I think the actors appreciate not kind of walking 2 foot and tripping up over a Matthew stand, or so it's always kind of, I think it is key, because it definitely lets them get on with what they're there to do, which is to create a character and kind of make that work for the scene, for the story. So
rather than feeling pinned into one spot or one space, or to be thinking about facilitating what the camera's doing.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a bit. I mean, you inevitably end up doing it sometimes, saying, "Stand there, don't move," but I think that very rarely happens. And so to give them freedom to do what they want to do, and then for the camera to be able to react. So inevitably, it isn't all locked down, and sometimes things happen that are completely unexpected. And so to be able to let them achieve that, I think that I'm pretty sure that does help their performances. And
a lot of your work, particularly Room, has quite a free-form, handheld sensibility to things. How did you and Tom approach the operating style for Danish Girl? What was the thought process?
Yeah, I mean, what was interesting is, we did chat about it, and I think you can have a lot of discussions before you actually start shooting, and in your head you're going to do one thing, and I think until you actually start shooting the schedule, it's always quite. I think you do discover a lot once you actually are in the location or on the set of and shooting, that things become apparent and the style develops. So I think it develops more once you start shooting than in pre-production, because I think inevitably there are always lots of unknowns, and you try and lock it down and try and be, quite sort of rigorous in how you prepare, but inevitably that all gets chucked out the window. And so on this one, we definitely went for a very kind of not a static frame, but the frames are very, they're quite still. We did use Steadicam a little bit. We didn't use, I think there were only literally 2 or 3 shots that were handheld in the end. So a lot of it was on dollies with little moves, or on sliders with tiny little moves. And it felt that was the right way to tell the story about, they were painters, and it all felt that it kind of worked for that that story. And, so they're quite, static, painterly frames, and it made sense. But and so I've just finished another film about another painter, and we kind of, again, the same approach held, except on that film I think we shot almost every single frame was handheld, and it was purely because that made sense for the story that we were telling about that painter. So I think for all the strictures, you kind of end up saying, this is what we're going to do, this is how it's going to work. If the story changes, then the style completely changes.
Yeah, I guess the static frames help to the drama, the turmoil that's inside to create the energy, rather than trying to force an energy onto the scene.
Yeah, no, I think you don't want the camera to lead the performances or the action. So I think it's definitely for this story, it just felt like it was it made sense. And one of the big, or possibly the only reference we talked about extensively in prep was there's a Danish painter called Wilhelm Hammershøi, and that was a kind of key reference for Eve, the production designer. And when we began to shoot, a lot of the frames that we were, or how we were framing the people in the shot, if you look at Hammershøi's sort of collective works, they mirror quite kind of extensively. So we kind of definitely found something that made sense for the story we were telling here.
And was that the same source of reference for the colour palette? So Copenhagen's sort of very sort of muted, saturated blues, and then that leads into a very golden Paris.
Yeah, hole in one. Yeah.
Sorry,
No.
I was supposed to be a question.
No, but that's so exactly that. It's so Hammershøi's. If you look at Hammershøi's paintings, the colours are very muted, sort of greys and silvers and a bit brown and a bit kind of blue and quite severe. So there's quite a restricted colour palette, which is always quite an interesting to adopt such a severe, controlled look is quite interesting. And then, but I think you'd struggle to sustain that for the whole film. So as soon as they go to Paris, then you get the freedom to kind of basically do a 180 turn and do something completely different. So that so it is colourful and the materials are richer and they've got more texture and there's more body to they've got curtains on the windows in they kind of had curtains, but they don't have big ruched curtains. So it's it's in every way to change the image kind of is an interesting visually. It just helps push the story along.
Yeah, and you tend to work a lot in mixed colour temperatures, and so King's Speech and Les Mis and again in Danish Girl has a lot of sort of cold daylight coming in through the windows and warm tungsten from, I'm guessing, like Chinese lanterns, that kind of thing. Is that just elaborate a bit on that technique and why it is that you use it?
I think it does look interesting, and also it feels if you end up shooting on sets, then to have the colour contrast between a daylight light and an interior light, I think having that mix just gives you a sense of reality. And I think if you end up, which inevitably, when you shoot on a set, you've got to do anything you possibly can to make it feel completely not a set. So anything that achieves that has got to help.
Add the chaos that isn't there in the reality.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so from a colour perspective, I'm guessing you had Anthony Bagley with you again as your DIT. Is there a colour workflow that you work with on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, we did on this one. We ended up doing a little bit of work before the shoot with Adam Glassman, who graded the final film. So what when we done the lens tests and kind of hair and makeup tests, we used those as the images to then work on a few lookup tables that Bagley could then apply on a day-to-day basis on set, and then on top of that sort of starting base, he'd kind of do a little every day. He'd tweak the image to work with the set or the exterior or the weather or whatever you come up against on a day-to-day basis, and then that look would piggyback the data all the way down to the final conform. And then when you get back into the grade with Adam Glassman, it was the starting point for the actual grade of the film. So
yeah, it was. So you were already sort of 3/4 of the way there, and then it was a case of either changing your mind or refining the approach.
Yeah.
Was there in the grade, were there any selective defocus things that you were doing? Did you tidy up any wigs or any of that sort of?
Yeah, I mean,
work?
there's always stuff to do, and inevitably, a digital grade lets you fix things on the day you were definitely struggling with. So, it's not. I think you'd be slightly bonkers not to use all the full set of tools that you can use in the grading suite, because inevitably, there are wig fixes you can do. There's blemishes on skin that you can sort out. Windows to kind of balance the day exterior with the interior if you're in a real location. So that inevitably, just because of schedules today, you don't have the time endlessly to sort of tweak on set. So you end up fixing bits and bobs, that's for sure.
Yeah, maybe even bedding in a CGI oak tree or
CGI. The oak tree was entirely CGI. So
just wondering if now's the time to open it out to you guys, and wondering if anybody has a question out there in the audience.
Hi, I just wondered if you could speak a little bit more about your collaboration with Tom Hooper over the course of the films you've worked on, and how it's changed, and how this film is maybe different than what you guys did on Les Mis, et cetera.
It's definitely. So the first thing I did with Tom was something called Longford, which was it's a true story. Again, it's similar in that it's. I think what interests Tom, is a true story that he can then put on the screen and have an interesting take on it. So I think all the things we've done, almost like we did an HBO series called John Adams, which was about the second president of America, and the King's Speech again was a true story, and so I think that's what interests him. He definitely likes to work with sort of historical material that is true, but then he'll work out an angle to make telling that story as interesting as possible. So I don't think he's changed radically in the stories he's choosing to tell. I think stylistically, I think he does mix it up, but that's so who knows what he's going to do next. But I think that's always an interesting. I think often directors kind of find a vein, a way of working, and then don't kind of go off at tangents. And I don't think you could accuse him of that. So it's always what he's up to is always quite interesting, I think.
Anybody else out there got a question? Okay, well, there we go. Yeah.
Hi, Danny. I'm just wondering, when you're lighting sets versus locations, do you have a sort of like a base look that you have decided on first before you arrive on location, or is it the look of, the first day sets the whole movie, or how do you sort of balance those things and keep it consistent?
There's a look of despair usually. I think the way it works is you do prep, and you do have a bit of time to visit locations and look around, scratch your head on a set and work out how in your head you'll light it, and hopefully those conversations you have with the director and the gaffer and the production designer kind of give you essentially somewhere to start on the day. But again, it's that thing about there is never a huge amount of time, so if you haven't done that, then you could easily lose a couple of hours if you change your mind, or there's something that you haven't expected happens. So I think you've definitely got to, you can't afford not to go into or any set or any location without basically knowing what you're going to do, because inevitably films are like sort of super tankers. They don't stop and they don't turn around very quickly. So unless you're kind of imposing a look on who's to say if it's the right or the wrong look, but you don't really have time in sort of the schedules we work with to do anything other than what you've prepped.
And how do you prep in a way that allows you the flexibility to respond to performances? Do you have like techniques to deal with that?
Yeah, I mean that's it. So there, inevitably you do all the prep you can do, and you approach situations where in your head you know what you're going to do. But after the first rehearsal that the director has with the actors, you might, or things play out in an unexpected way, and then you have to sort of rapidly think on your feet because everything's not how you thought it would play out. So inevitably, things always change on the day. But it's like having, whether it's enough gear or enough people or cherry pickers in the right place, or the ability to turn a day scene into not, in the back of your head, I think you're always trying to have options that you slowly kind of go down the list.
The list of despair.
The list of despair.
And do you get, when working with a director like Tom a number of times, do you find yourself involved in the rehearsal process? Do you hang out with the performers beforehand to get an idea of how some of the scenes are going to take shape?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, definitely once you get on set or at a location, I definitely find it really helpful to sit in on all the rehearsals, just because you can, as they rehearse, as things sort of play out, you can very quickly see if it's what you have prepared and how you've lit it is going to work, or whether you've got to kind of quickly tweak stuff. And inevitably you have a bit of time between the end of the rehearsal when you turn over because of hair, makeup, so there's a bit of, but inevitably that amount of time shrinks. Depending on the budget of the film and whether it's a costume drama or whether it's now, so there are always a lot of kind of variables, but you do have time to change stuff, which inevitably you have to, because the unexpected always does happen.
Yeah, in fact, should be encouraged.
Yeah. It would be a dull world if it weren't to be.
Do you have another question just down here?
I was curious about whether you had any reasons for there's quite a few shots with crossing the lines, and also on the reverses there's a different focal length. I was wondering if you could say a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting working with Tom is definitely not a stickler for traditional approaches. So yeah, I mean, we definitely crossed the line occasionally, but you don't get arrested and then thrown in jail. And I mean, and also lens-wise, it inevitably sort of boils down to what works. So I think Tom definitely, all he's really interested in is telling a story and telling it in the most interesting way, which is, so that's a fantastic place to start. And you inevitably throw away a lot of traditional things. I mean, on this, people, one of the things he really likes is wide lenses close to actors' faces, and he gets a lot of flack for it, but it's just as a way of involving the audience who are watching the film. It's a great way to bring people into that story. So I think he's very, very kind of pragmatic in that instance. What looks good on camera is what's important, and bollocks to everything else.
Yeah, there's a interesting scene where the Gerda and Ina are talking to the doctor. We were talking about it whilst the scene was progressing, and actually, even though Gerda's eye line is theoretically across to the doctor, when it cuts back to the doctor's always looking at Lily, never looking at Gerda. So the eye line always works, and it immediately makes Gerda the outsider in the conversation. So it feels like it's a legitimate artistic device to exclude a character from a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, Gerda looks to the right of frame, and when the doctor addresses Lily, he's looking right, and any glances to Gerda right as well. But technically, that's wrong. So, but it doesn't stick out as awkward. So I think that's a case in point. It's not traditionally what you do, but because it doesn't. Nobody jumps up and says that you've crossed the line. It doesn't. They're looking to where they're not. It's not that important.
Any more questions out there?
I'd just like to know what was your relationship with the production designer, and if you had any input with the color of the sets and the costume.
Yeah, no, I mean, Eve has worked, likewise, same as me, has worked with Tom on quite a lot of his films, and so it's always a three-way conversation that sort of come up with colours for walls and stuff like that. And in this instance, because we were kind of trying to adhere to the sort of palette that we'd seen in the Hammershøi paintings, it was a lot of the time it was trying to match the sets with the paintings. But I think you're on slightly sticky ground because we couldn't afford to have the real Hammershøis. You're looking at reproductions, and even though they're very good reproductions, they're not bang on. So I think you go down a certain road, certain colours, certain palettes, but then there is room for what looks good on camera, which is again something different to how it looks to the eye. And then you've got to take into account once the set's up and you're shooting, that inevitably the grade will affect the colours of the walls and stuff like that. So there are lots of things you've got to take into consideration.
And there's a lot of reflections in not only mirrors but just general windows, any bit of glass. Did you talk consciously with Eve about all of that stuff to have that facilitated? Yeah,
I mean, I think, and also Tom, he was quite. I mean, it just makes for interesting frames, like the scene where Eddie goes to the strip tease. I think it was a total nightmare to get all those reflections of her and him to sit in the right spot, and it was quite tricky to get, and then to be able to kind of, once you start shooting, the interesting focus pulls, the out of focus, and the whatever's sharp. So you do tie yourself in knots, but I think if you in your head you kind of know where you're going, and what you're trying to achieve, if it works really well.
Another question.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about or ask you about the thorny issue of highlights and tying yourself in knots. Because in a certain kind of naturalism, you can get away with a bunch of reflections going off because that's what's happening. And in a movie like this, where it's pretty in your face, seems to me. Do you ever toy with the idea of introducing a second highlight as a point of indecision? Or you know what I'm talking about? Like
I think we were quite sort of hardcore about that. Is that I think what looks quite peculiar is two highlights. So if you've got two pings in one eyeball and two eyeballs, or two pings per eyeball, it just looks a bit weird. So as much as possible, but inevitably you do get that where there are more than one source that the actor or actress is looking towards. So you sometimes do get it, but I think it's just a cleaner, simpler image if it just has one ping.
Next question. Oh, I thought I saw some hands. Sorry. I'm at a loss for words now. Hang on. Save me, Danny. What haven't we talked about? Oh, we wanted to talk about magenta. You just whispered the word magenta in my ear, like a romantic one DP to another.
Yeah, I think one of the, I don't know if it's that bigger issue, but I think I think more so now on HD than film is just the way digital works. Is there it always feels like there's a magenta bias, whether it's Red or whether it's Alexa or any other camera. It's some combination of how you shoot it, how it's projected. You always, in the grade, you always end up taking magenta out. I don't really understand why, but it's definitely something that's a pain.
Yeah, and was there also issues with magenta and skin tones particularly, or the difference in skin tone between Alicia and Eddie? Eddie obviously plays it really pale if he, can play a skin tone.
He can play pale. Yeah. No, I think it's definitely clearly it's in the image. So there's a sort of, unless you get rid of it, there's a sort of magenta cast in Eddie's paleness, but there's a magenta cast in Alicia's warmer skin tone. So it's about kind of trying to find a balance where that doesn't distract from their faces. So I think there's one instance where I think we should have taken a slight bit more, where Eddie's looking in, I think it's when he's putting on his eyeliner. There's a big magenta ear. So shooting over his shoulder, seeing a soft magenta something. But
you're obsessing over soft magentaness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay. Has the magenta led to any more questions from the? There's a magenta question. Hopefully not a magenta question.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Hello. That's an interesting point about magenta. What? Oh, sorry. Have you ever experienced it? Is it on all lenses that you find?
I don't think it's a lens thing. I think it's a chip thing and a projecting image thing. So I think it's always a combination of, maybe it is lenses, but I don't think it's more or less whether you use master primes or Cooks or Leicas or whatever. I think it's there.
Yeah, it's only interesting because I was lucky enough to be involved in some tests for Wolf Hall, and Gavin Finney, who's the DOP, he shot tests with master primes, Leicas, Cooks on candles, and the interesting thing was that you did get colour contamination with master primes, and to a degree with Cooks, not quite as much. With the Cooks, it tended to be cyan, and with the master primes, it was magenta. But with the Leicas, the halation around the candles was absolutely clean.
Right.
And it was interesting what you were saying about choosing your lens choice for stop, because I just wondered if you tested the Leica Summilux, because they're 1.4.
I don't think we did at the time. I can't remember why, but maybe you couldn't afford it.
Oh, it's possible. But No, just for interest's sake. I think that was quite an
I
interesting.
think more testing's required.
Yeah.
Yeah, another 20 minutes
Yeah.
of testing.
Yeah.
There's another question. The microphone running.
Hi, I'm interested to know how much you research the subject matter of a film, or how much I'm sure you're looking at paintings like Hammershøi and other films, but how much do you actually like research the story subject matter, like Room and Danish Girl?
No, I mean, I kind of do as much as I can in the time I get, because you always, I mean, Room, I think I possibly had maybe 4 or 5 weeks prep. And again, basically, whatever prep you get is never enough, because you can, the more you sort of think about the story and how the story works, and then what you can do to help sort of push the story forward with the cinematography. I think that's kind of key. But inevitably, on this, you can only do so much in 3 weeks. So you you end up being like a massive hoover and just trying to get as much information in your brain, and then it somehow synthesizes and kind of whatever. And I think inevitably, prep and research can be anything. So it's like it is like thinking of films that are vaguely relevant, or photographers, or anything visual that might sort of bring up an interesting idea. But it's always, I think the time pressure is always the killer.
Yeah, do you find you sort of try to act as the divining rod of decision making? Like it can go, you can do this thing or this thing, and this thing's truer to the original intent, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in my head it's like as much information you can cram in your brain, and then once you start shooting, then it's like you sort of try and use the variety of stuff you've got in there to kind of give it some sort of consistency and sort of continuity, and then you kind of hopefully thought about how the story changes over the however long, 90 minutes, 100 minutes, and then how you can kind of use what you're doing to kind of push it along.
And of your either limited or extensive prep, what of that do you inflict on the other operator and the gaffer? How do you pass on your brain full of stuff?
With a hammer.
Very good.
No, I think as much as possible. Yeah, I think it's a case, especially I've worked with Paul McGeechan, the gaffer, for quite a long time, and I kind of, we talk through, especially when we're doing location recce's and stuff like that, as much as possible. I'll give him the ideas I've been sort of thinking about to then, give ourselves options about how we approach different scenes, different places, and I think once you start doing recce's, then more things do fall into place. So on this, we were filming a lot in museum, in Brussels. We had quite a few locations in Brussels, which were really kind of sort of very precious interiors where we could do very little. So then it's working out what you can do, so you kind of keep the look going if you can't do anything at all. So it's like, sometimes it's a lot about using negative fill and kind of using stuff like that to hopefully keep things consistent look-wise. Otherwise, they'll just sort of jump out.
Yeah, especially if you've got a delicate location or whatever that gives you a remit that says you can't add a light or add any cherry pickers outside a building or whatever.
Yeah, I mean there was ones which was Hans, the art dealer's. That interior was a museum. I can't remember. It was a Belgian architect whose name escapes me. But we weren't allowed to use a dolly. We couldn't put any lights on the floor. I think we could have one light in the garden, something like that. So then you got to kind of work out how you're going to, make it look interesting.
Yeah, and keep it cohesive with the rest of the film.
Yep.
Is there another question? Where's the microphone right
It's
now?
over here. Hello.
Oh.
Hey, Danny. I just wanted to go back to the camera choice briefly. I know we talked a while ago about Red when I think we both had the sort of feeling that Alexa become quite ubiquitous and it felt like Red offered something a little different. I'm wondering if you've still been using the camera since this, or whether it's still something you choose to either use or not use depending on the project.
I definitely, yeah, I kind of, since shooting this, I've shot a film on the Red and I've shot on a film on the Alexa. So I'm definitely, I think it's always what works for the story. So had I known we weren't going to do any handheld, it might have been a different choice. But, you know, I think you end up, when you're doing prep, and if you do have time to do some tests, kind of, it's playing with the look. And we did comparisons on the Alexa and on the Red when we did our tests. And, you know, I think inevitably, in the end, it's just subjective. It was just something.
So, I mean, were there particular characteristics that you liked for this, or it was just how it looked?
I think it was more. It was just. You know, once we did the tests, the makeup and hair and makeup tests with Eddie and Lisha, it just felt there was. I think it was more to do with Tom's aversion to having a softer image that the camera gave us, as opposed to what we were doing in front of the camera. So the Alexa definitely feels that it takes the edge off things in a way that the Red doesn't. So for this story, it felt like letting us do the diffusion as opposed to the lens or the camera or the chip, which I think happens on the Alexa. It felt like that just gave the faces a bit of a bite that we couldn't achieve on the Alexa.
I just had one other question about I'm also a big fan of the sort of wide-angle close-up, and I used it quite a lot recently. But the one thing I did find is that sometimes actors get very put off by having the camera that close. You know, like we were using a sort of 27mm 4 feet, and it means it's quite hard to actually get the other actor to see them sometimes. Did you ever come across that difficulty with any of your cast?
Yeah, absolutely. I hate it. I think, you know, so I think on the one hand, you kind of say, I'm going to stick to not trying to put too many stands on the floor and not too much, no sort of big sheets of poly, so it makes it awkward. And then you put a camera right in somebody's face and they can't actually see the person they're acting with. But, you know, I think they know that you're not doing it maliciously. It's just about trying to get an interesting image. And, you know, there are ways, you know, get rid of the matte box, you get rid of... So, line of sight is always kind of something they like that.
Another question from out on the floor?
Yeah, I was just wondering how you and Tom work together in terms of storyboarding or shot lists, and if you use like storyboards, how closely did you follow those, and how much was kind of captured in the moment?
On this film, I don't think we storyboarded very much at all. Something like Les Mis, just because there were some scenes were quite extensive, and then there's kind of a cost to shots that producers love to know up front, so they kind of know what they're getting into. So storyboards help that process. So in a weird way, I think they're not that creatively useful, because you're ending up sort of handcuffing yourself. Whereas on something like this, we could definitely approach almost everything, you know, knowing what the story was, seeing the rehearsal, and then kind of choosing coverage that hopefully works. But because there's not a huge amount of CGI, it wouldn't have been that it would have been a waste of money, basically, because you end up employing a storyboard artist at vast expense for 3 weeks to come up with images that it's people in a room and they're looking that way. So in a story like this, I don't think they're of that important, or great importance.
Had you previously used them on your other collaborations with Tom? Is there a relaxing of of a technique, or
No,
is
no,
it
no, because I
still
think
just
like,
found?
it's just whatever works. Because I mean, on the King's Speech, there was a fair bit of CGI, so you definitely had to kind of know the angles, and you'd have to shoot stuff and then shoot plates. So it's a different process. So and then likewise on Les Mis, there's some big crowd scenes, and like the beginning of the film starts with a camera kind of going over a digital boat and then into reality. So it's like linking all that sort of stuff becomes quite important. So the whoever does do the CGI becomes quite involved, and therefore storyboards are kind of a really useful tool.
Yeah, I guess you say you use it whenever you need to, like a cross-department conversations, rather than simply being about capturing a performance in a room.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Any more questions? Has the microphone made its way to elsewhere? No? Well, then there we go. Sorry, John.
Danny, how often did you use two cameras? I saw the...
On Danish Girl, I think virtually every setup.
Oh, right.
So as much as we could. So Ian Mackay was the A camera operator, and wherever we could, I think that, again, that's something Tom's, even on Longford, he was very insistent that as much as possible was shot with two camera, and I think that for him it works because he just gives himself options that he may sort of need in the edit. So he definitely sort of fights to have two cameras fully crewed right the way through the shoot. So that I think becomes really an important part of it.
So did you do the second camera, or do you have another?
Yeah, so I'd operate the second one because they couldn't afford another operator. So.
And how do you, there's a lot of very wide angle lenses. How do you work towards that two camera technique when you have a 12mm at 2 foot kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. You'd have the one camera there, and the second camera would be a millimetre to the right of the frame of the first camera. So wherever you can squeeze it in, or sometimes it isn't possible, but as much as we could, we'd do it.
Any more questions from out the front? No. Is there one there? Yeah.
So you always shoot two cameras, then would you always look at the same way with the two cameras? And if you can expand a little bit on this, if you had a wide angle, would you being the second camera, what would you pick up with the second camera? Close up, or?
The delicate balance is that sound recorders hate two cameras not of a similar focal length, because it's one of the things that they don't want to record wide sound if it's a close, intimate scene, so which I can understand. So you kind of try and make it work that you do, if you're cross-shooting, shoot on similar focal lengths if possible. Potentially if one's a wide lens, maybe you end up shooting on a very, very close lens, but the only thing you don't shoot are people's mouths. So there's lots of detail you can pick up. So it's quite a tricky area, because some sound recorders let you do a little more than others, and you have to appreciate that they wouldn't like to have the sound from two sizes, a 12mm and a 75mm, intercutting, because it'll just sound really odd. So you kind of have to work around those kind of slight constraints. But there's or you end up shooting two sizes one way, or you cross shoot similar sizes. There's a huge sort of combination of or permutations of how to do it.
Well, I think we're running out of time, so we'll have to leave it on the permutations of the infinite. Thank you very much to Danny Cohen BSC.